Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Jenny McCoy, and we have Fabio Parasecoli with me as well, co-curators of the event. I'm just going to be sharing a little bit of information with you guys to consider throughout the rest of the day on day 2 of our conference. So many thanks to all of our sponsors, and of course, thank you guys all for attending. We're so glad you're here and hope you had a really amazing day 1. We're really excited about what's happening on day 2. So yesterday was reimagine, and now today we will repurpose. Please be sure throughout the conference to dispose of your waste properly. And if you would all please, at the end of the panel sessions here, just take a quick look at the floor. And if there's any disposables or items that you've left, gather them and dispose of them properly on your way out. We have a waste station right across from the registration desk. Also, as I mentioned yesterday, the travel time to ICE, you have about a 90-minute break after the panels and until the demonstrations and hands-on classes resume. So please give yourself ample time. If you didn't travel to ICE yesterday, then you might not realize, but ICE is on the 3rd floor of a large building, and it can take a little bit of time to navigate. So give yourself plenty of time. There's a really, really amazing lunch option on the 2nd floor of the building that ICE is located in called Hudson Eats. So maybe head down there early, grab some lunch, and come up to ICE. Please keep your badges to check in at ICE as well. And then that will help us direct you to the demonstration that you're going to or the hands-on class that you're signed up for. And then last but not least, please share your experiences on social media using hashtag #ZeroWasteFood. Thanks and have a great day.
So we'll start with the first panel of the day. And the moderator is Andy Smith, who's on the faculty of the Food Studies program. So the students who are here probably have taken some of his classes, or the classes are quite popular also with the general public. As you know, here at the new school, we allow general public to enroll in our classes as part of our continuing education. Now the whole initiative is called Open Campus and will include also online courses. So we're trying to make our faculty and what we do more available to the community. So Andy is the author and editor of 32 books. I repeat, 32. He's extremely prolific. He's appeared on many shows as expert, of course. Between the work he edited, we have the 3-volume Food in America. Then we have books on fast food, the Savoring Gotham, a food lover companion to New York City, and many others. Actually, we worked together for a conference a couple of years ago that was called Gotham on a Plate, that was inspired by Andy's work for this book. So, Andy.
I asked Fabio to introduce me as he's a nice guy, but he chose not to do that. I don't know why, Fabio. I'm absolutely delighted to chair this panel of 4 wonderful people who do not need to be introduced. They don't need to be introduced for 2 reasons. The first is that their fame extends far beyond this panel. Everybody knows who they are. And the second reason is I provided, being a good educator, I provided their biographies for you. I've done this because frequently when you get older, you forget who the person is if they're all introduced at the beginning. So we have 4 wonderful panelists, and we would like to begin with Katy Franklin. Katy Franklin is the program manager for ReFed, which is a collaboration of 30 businesses, nonprofit, foundations, government leaders. It's committed to reducing food waste in America. So, Kate.
Thank you, Andy, for that introduction. And I'm Katy Franklin, and as Andy said, I'm the program manager at ReFed, and we are a collaborative nonprofit working to reduce food waste here in America. And just over a year ago, ReFed produced a roadmap to reduce food waste, U.S. food waste, by 20%, and it identified an economic analysis of 27 different solutions that are available and ready to be implemented, and in almost every case already being implemented across the country. And what's more exciting about the roadmap is that it demonstrated that food waste is a solvable problem, and it's something that we're already starting to solve. So right now, ReFed is working with stakeholders to implement, replicate, and scale these 27 solutions. And one of the ways we do this is by working with innovators. So earlier this month, ReFed launched the Innovator Database. It's a living compilation of hundreds of commercial and nonprofit entities addressing the food waste issue. And we launched on April 18th with 400 innovators, and over the past 11 days, we've already received 36 requests from new innovators wishing to be added. And so we have a couple different ways that you can look at the innovators. You can use the list view to search them by organizational status, so nonprofit, for-profit, where they fall within the food recovery hierarchy, so recovery, prevention, and recycling, solution type, and geographic reach. You can see a map view, like shown here, see the geographic spread, and it is a global database. And then you can also use the analysis view to glean insights such as the fact that 46% of these innovators are working on prevention solutions, and 9 out of 10 of those are for-profit entities. So these are our top 5 innovator areas, and the second largest is food product creation. And right now we have 63 entities that are innovating in this space. And then donation transportation is the biggest, and composting is our 5th largest, and that does include community, in-vessel, and centralized composting. So we've described food product creation as an organization that's converting edible food that would currently be considered waste into a value-added consumer food product. And this is happening in a couple of different ways. Some organizations are taking surplus produce, so these are imperfect or cosmetically challenged produce items that would be rejected from export or might be left on the farm. Some examples here that we've provided are Barnana. They are actually upcycling organic bananas that get rejected from export and turning them into dehydrated snacks, banana brittles, and other tasty consumer options. Ugly Juice is sourcing imperfect produce to create juice products. Ventura Spirits is actually rescuing surplus strawberries and distilling them into a strawberry wine. And Uglies is a surplus-sourced potato chip. So you can see that there are a bunch of different examples of ways that we can keep eating this food, and it's not waste. These are perfectly edible. A lot of them they might be the wrong size, the bananas might be a little too ripe, or maybe the peel has a scuff on it, but at the end of the day, they're perfectly edible, nutritious, and wholesome. So then we also have some innovators that are creating products out of food scraps. So these would be your vegetable trimmings or your chicken carcasses. Baldor is taking fruit and vegetable trimmings and creating vegetable-based flours and other ingredient products. Huba Foods is actually using the stalk of mushrooms to create a protein substitute because the caps actually generate a higher margin and often the stalks are thrown out. Easton Brewing is creating beer incorporating bread scraps. So all of the times that you've cut the crust off a PBJ, then they would want to take it. They aren't taking directly from consumers, but it's just a fun way to think about it. Rooster Soup Company is actually a really interesting story. They're a nonprofit, and they were started because a restaurant in Philadelphia called Federal Donuts, they're known for their donuts and fried chicken, they realized that they were throwing out 500 pounds of chicken scraps every single week. And it wasn't waste, these were necks, bones, things that could still be used. So in 2014, they partnered with a local ministry, and they decided to start creating a stock out of those chicken scraps. And rather than putting them to waste, they now have a company that donates 100% of its profits back to the community, providing meals and social services for Philadelphia's most vulnerable citizens. And then we have byproducts. So byproducts are leftover food items from creating consumer products in a non-kitchen setting. So this would be a brewery, a juicery, from the coffee milling process, or even creating yogurt. And that's exactly what these innovators up here do. Coffee flour takes the skins that are removed during the coffee milling process and creates flour. Regrained is rescuing spent grain from breweries and creating consumer snacks like energy bars and similar items. Pulp Pantry is rescuing the leftovers from the juicing process. So every time you go and get a delicious juice, there's actually a lot of material that's left over from the pulp there, and they're using that to create food powders, so seasonings and other ingredients. And then the White Mustache, which is a fun name, they are actually taking the whey left over from the yogurt making process and creating whey tonics. And this is a great way to also return nutrients to the food system. So a lot of these items that get thrown out, we're losing potassium, we're losing calcium, and this is just closing the loop on so many of those options. And these are only an inkling of what's out there. So our surplus food produce section is actually the largest within food product creation. We have 30 innovators there. In food scraps, we only have 9 right now, and in byproducts, we have 14. So it's an interesting spread, and these companies are, a lot of them are here in the US, but we have some, Uglies is a Dutch company, and Easton Brewery actually has a counterpart called Toast Ale that does a similar process, and they just launched here in the US, coming over from Europe. And so those are also just a sample, and they're growing every day. So like I said, we've had 36 new additions in the past 11 days, and to this category in particular, we've had about 5 new organizations spring up. And all of these companies and nonprofits that you see on the screen right here have started in the past 17 years or so. Or 7 years or so, pardon me. So many of these organizations are coming online really quickly. And the database as a whole, 49% of the 436 innovators have launched since 2012. And so I encourage you to go check out the innovator database. It's at refed.com/innovators. And even if you've already looked at it, I encourage you to look at it again because it's already grown and there are new fun things to learn. And one of my favorite things about it actually is every time I learn about a new innovator, I learn something new about a particular industry. One that I didn't have up there is actually rescuing water from the maple syrup process. And I recently learned that when syrup is tapped for trees, only 3% actually goes into making syrup, and the 97% that's left is clean, perfectly drinkable water. And so we just met an innovator that's bottling that up and selling it to consumers. Anasari. It's either Anasari or Asarasi. I'll have to get the spelling for you, but I can get that for you.
One exciting innovator that you failed to mention was Toast Beer, which is a tremendous beer producer in the UK. It's now coming to New York City, so I thought I'd just mention this in passing. So we have Chef. All of our presenters are wonderful, but Chef Mehta actually serves good food in addition to dealing with food waste issues. For those of you that have not been to Graffiti, me and you and Graffiti Earth, you got to go. That's all I can say. Chef?
I don't need it. Okay. Hi, guys. Katie, one thing I must thank you from one thing that you said, which was very, we've always called them ugly produce and stuff like that, but I've never heard this terminology, which I'm going to use for myself, which is cosmetically challenged. I really like this terminology because now I can get my parking in the disability counter. So I am going to use that. My disability is cosmetically challenged. So I thank you for this lovely terminology that you gave me. So this is going to be the most important thing that is to take away for myself. But other than that, thank you very much for having me. And talking about food waste, as you know, there is tons of it in our houses. I mean, just take yourself there. How often have you opened your refrigerator or any of your cabinets and said, this doesn't look great, and you throw it away? Besides saying, oh, say it was a lemon. It got tarnished a little bit, but you've not said, let me cut into half and see if it's completely wasted, and then keep the salvaged 1/3 of it, or half of it, or maybe nothing of it, or just the zest of it. But we are so used to just taking some stuff and throwing it away. So it starts with us. I think that's the most important thing, that the most amount of wastage in this country, 40% of that is from households. I mean, we are very, very we're good at saying, oh, the farmers in farmlands, it's just 18% of it is wasted over there. In companies, there's about 23%, but 40% is, on an average, is from households. So before we try and always pass the buck, I think we should first look into ourselves at how we lead our lives and how we function as a society. And as Henry Thoreau has always said, what is the use of a house if you don't have a decent planet to put it on? So think about that. It is no sense of always us blaming others, but first think of how we can make the biggest difference to society. we at the restaurant at Graffiti Earth try as much as we can in terms of not only looking at waste in terms of food, we also look at all our plates, silverware, crockery, all of it is hand-me-downs. We've not bought a single piece of crockery, cutlery, or glasses, unfortunately, because we have clumsy wait staff. But other than that, we try to use everything which is hands-me-down. So my cousins and family are more than happy to give things away. My friends have given things away. If y'all want to ever give it away once you're graduating, let us know. We'll pick that up too. So, so it is another way of showcasing how we can stop that wastage. The napkins in our restaurants are close to about 6 to 8 inches, only squares of cloth, and they are from scraps of materials which are going to be thrown away. So we've got them stitched, and those are our napkins. You don't need much of a napkin to wipe your mouth. I think most mouths are about 3 inches. So at least they should be. I know we can open it to about 16, but because that is one thing which when I came to this country in '93, I always was fascinated until today, and now I don't eat meat, so I stopped, so that is not a craving for me. But I always wondered, how do Americans open their mouth to put that burger in? It fascinated me because I would still eat it with a fork and knife. I could never imagine how that mouth could open so wide to put that piece of burger in your mouth. But it does for quite a few million people, but not for the billion people who live in India. But talking about India, I was there in December. I saw one of them. This was really, really fascinating to me. I go into this condo building, and there is a refrigerator there. And basically, it's a community refrigerator. So if you were going on a trip or you just didn't want something to eat, you just put it into that refrigerator, and one of your neighbors will say, well, today I don't want to cook. Let me just take this from this refrigerator. There could be milk, there was cheese, there were eggs, there were just random things which were cooked in there. And I thought that was so fascinating. And the thing is, at around something, there was a cutoff time around 7:38 or whatever, something like that. And then it was open to anybody. Like, I mean, so your drivers could go in there, the building super could access that, but it was open to everybody after some cutoff time. And I think it was so fascinating to see that food is being utilized by a community, by just a building doing this on their own. And I figured out a little more that this one person who thought of this idea does it even in his office. The fridge is a community fridge. You just put things there. Whoever wants to take anything takes anything from that fridge. And I think that's a very, very good step, because it first happens, the best way to get rid of food is give it to a human being. Of course, you could give it to your dogs and animals, but the last process should be composting. It shouldn't always go that, oh, we're doing a great job by composting. Why not first utilize it among ourselves before we go to that composting aspect of food? And repurposing that food. I worked with the University of Massachusetts, which happened about close to 2 years. I mean, I've been working with them a little bit here and there since the last 5 years, but since 2 years, I started this project with them called Pledge with Jehangir, and basically what we do is we repurpose food. So for instance, if there is stuff left over from breakfast, say there is sausage, eggs, and oatmeal left, how do I use that sausage, eggs, and oatmeal into lunch? So from the oatmeal, let's make it into an oatmeal pudding, for instance, or let's make it into an oatmeal cake. So we've got that covered. From the sausage and the scrambled eggs, why don't we make it into fried rice? So basically, we will use that, and our food cost also comes down, of course, as well as you're just not wasting that much food. One thing that I was walking around on campus, I realized that they do their own turkey and they slice their own turkey. And every time, I mean, you must have seen this in delis. Every time when they are slicing it, there is that scrap which keeps falling from the slicer. We figured out we could make close to 20 turkey salads out of that scrap, which was at the end of every shift. And it was something that was getting wasted, thrown away, as well as in aspects of the college started making a little more money on that one salad, as well as it's basically showcasing food waste. We have at the restaurant, as well as at on campus, what we do is all the vegetable scraps. After, it could be onion skins, it could be carrots, it could be whatever. We make a vegetable stock with it and make a soup. So all the scraps of the whole kitchen get into this pot. We boil it, make a vegetable stock, and that gets made into a soup. The soup at University of Massachusetts, the homemade soup, was, the food cost was 28%. Now it's 12%. Our dumpling cost is 5% because what we do is all the stuff that is left over from lunch gets put into these dumplings. We make different combinations of dumplings, and basically we make dumplings for dinner. So again, it's the filling. So the food cost of that dumpling is 5%. So it's not only, and I don't think you should only think of it as a cost saver. You should also think of it as in many different ways besides cost saving. Of course, the food cost. It reduces waste, and garbage costs money too, if you didn't know that. We have to pay money to pick up garbage. So your garbage cost is going to go down. You feed more people for less food that you're ordering. Hopefully you're saving the planet. And as we say it, be proud and say, I ate my compost. And that is what we try to tell people. That try and see how you can almost hashtag this every day to your brain. I'm not saying to a piece of equipment, to your brain every day, and say, I ate my compost. And that is most important. How can we save on little things every day and make it better? So having said that, there are other things in terms of our food. What we also look into is fish. I mean, sustainable fishing is very important, but besides that, there is more to that. There is a lot of stuff which you are not used to seeing. For instance, scallops. Every magazine that you might have opened, every plate of chefs who have put up pictures of scallops are this beautiful looking scallop which is gold encrusted, and it just looks gorgeous. But there is a good amount of scallops which the fishermen catch which are broken. And the fishermen throw it back into the ocean because no one wants to buy a broken scallop. It's just unappetizing for many people, and it doesn't sell. So we have hooked up with a couple of fishermen. There are a couple of chefs of ours who have hooked up with these fishermen, and they send us their broken scallops. They're stopping, throwing them into the ocean, and we buy those broken scallops. So I think in terms of, it's the same product. It's absolutely the same product. I mean, it tastes great. I mean, there is nothing wrong with that product. It's just the look. And we are not perfect. I mean, look at the fashion of, I mean, I just did this demo. Unfortunately, I didn't bring those beautiful photographs, but there were these runway models with toned clothing. I mean, right now, toned clothing is so in. I mean, literally, you're taking clothes and purposely tearing them or making holes in them and stuff like that. If that can be looked as beauty, why can't an ugly fruit and vegetables look beautiful? I mean, as well as fish and stuff like that. So it's really trying to consume and repurpose and use food in a way that we can make the land better. That is definitely the case, as well as how we can make less wastage. That is the basic principle. Going into food, of course, try and see to it like mushrooms on an aspect. Eating mushrooms is, of course, great, but more than anything, mushrooms use the least amount of water on land. Plus, they use the least amount of land because they're grown in beds. So again, we use a lot of mushrooms in our diet because of that. Even in our burgers, 30% of our burger, it has mushroom in it, and it blends extremely well because they grind extremely well, like shiitakes and portobellos grind extremely well. Also, they give out moisture. They both have umami, tomato, meat, and mushrooms. All three have umami, and we put all of that in. So they blend extremely well, and you're eating less red meat. To grow mushrooms, on an average, you need 1 gallon of water for growing 5 pounds of mushrooms. For meat, you need 250 gallons of water to get 1 pound of meat at the end of the meat production. So there's a huge saving in terms of water too. So that is something that you need to keep in mind with. Lastly, I also want to tell you, 63 million tons of food is wasted in this country. 63 million. I mean, that is a big number of food that gets wasted because of just lack of concern. And it is something that I think all of us, if we just took that one extra step, can make it much, much better. In terms of reducing food waste, as many people feel, is how does it happen? Besides, I won't say reducing food waste, if it is, there is some alternative ways of eating. And yes, besides mushroom, what else can we do? Algae, insects. I know it might sound a little gross, but insects are a good terms of protein. And I'll tell you two funky stories. I mean, yesterday I was with Amanda Cohen from Dirt Candy at another event at the CIA, and she mentioned that when she was small, she chewed on a towel, and in the end it became such an issue that her mother had to break that rule. And so the doctor has told her that soak the towel in vinegar. And we were talking about acid trip yesterday. So this is how it happened. And so her mother soaked this towel in vinegar, and was waiting to see that, okay, now my daughter is going to say this towel tastes disgusting and will stop chewing this towel, when she was like 7 years old. And finally, her daughter, Amanda, turns around and says, "This tastes like salad dressing. I love it." So, so sometimes it can backfire. And same thing, talking about insects. I don't know if we should gross these people out, Fabio, but the point is, I was about the same age, and one day I saw a large cockroach, and I thought it was very fascinating. I picked it up and put it into my mouth. And it was alive, and it was kicking around, and I thought it was so cool because this cockroach was going all crazy in my mouth. And my mother, yeah, you're like, where did Fabio find this man? I mean, I see how you're looking at me. Yeah. So, so in terms of, my mother actually almost had to pinch the shit out of me to take that cockroach out. And but I thought it was very fascinating. And now edible insects are a big rage. So I think that is very, very cool. And my grandmother always told us to eat black ants. Black ants are good for your eyes, is what she said. I think that's why I think now I see why the Persian community is looked out as, like, they are a little bit weird. So basically, but we always were told to eat black ants because of that. But I think things like that is something that we really need to encompass. Same thing goes with algae and sea greens and sea vegetables and kelp. They have a lot of nutrition, as well as they are extremely sustainable because you're not using much more water for that. So that is basically what I really wanted to tell you about today. And if there is anything that you need to ask later on, please do so. But just take this thought with you. Great things never happen from comfort zones. Push yourself a little more every day. Thank you.
Our third panelist is Doug Rauch. Doug is the founder and president of Daily Table, but for 31 years he worked at Trader Joe's. So, Doug.
We'll start with a self-portrait here. So I actually believe it's important in anything to start with the question, why? For me, my journey after I left Trader Joe's, after I graduated after 31 years, I started a fellowship at Harvard, and in the process, I started to study wasted food, hunger, obesity, etc. And frankly, I had the same idea I think many Americans do, that hunger is a shortage of calories, and that there were 49 million at that time, 1 in 6 Americans that were walking around just starving to death. I also, from the food industry, knew that at 31 years, there was a lot of food being wasted, but I didn't actually fully understand all the components and where most of the waste was occurring. So I think it's really critical for anything to step back and continually question what's going on here. Because I was about to go off and form what I thought was a brilliant solution to the wrong problem. Now, I make this pitch almost every time I talk about this. This phrase that's used by the industry, used by all of us that get excited about this, I think is a phrase that people do not emotionally connect with. How many of you want a second helping of food waste? Sounds kind of disgusting. Why? Because we're taught in English class that waste is the noun and food's the modifier. This is waste, and it came from food. It's really something maybe the sanitation department should handle. The challenge is that when you get involved with this, as I think everyone on the panel is going to talk about, that this is what happens. You realize that these two words should be flipped, and it's wasted food. The vast majority of what we're talking about is food, healthy, nutritious, wholesome, that's going to waste. And I think it actually flips also the emotional connection that we all have to it. Because when you start talking about wasted food, people respond differently than when you talk about food waste. Food waste kind of sounds industrial. It sounds maybe, institutional, systemic, like, yeah, we ought to have some sort of a program to handle that. Whereas wasted food gets a little more personal, doesn't it? Like, most people don't think about their house as generating food waste, but everybody can relate to the household generating wasted food. So just a minor pitch that I do on this, because I actually think that words matter, narrative matters, and if we really care about engaging at the grassroots level, people's emotions in addition to just their intellectual concept, we need to present it in a way that I think we can relate to tangibly, personally, and frankly, I think it's a far more accurate term. So here's an example. A gentleman from one of the largest companies I'd never heard of, Marcon, which is a large cooperative that serves food service companies that are out in California. Tim York and I were on a panel down in Washington, D.C., and he put this slide up that you let me graciously use after that. And it was a picture basically of a field of lettuce. And the only thing about this picture that's interesting is this is after the harvest. So all of this was plowed under. It was plowed under because, one, the labor to go out and pick this product would have exceeded its value at that time, because this product was grown for, you've seen those plastic clamshells where you get the entire lettuce with the root ball and it fits in there and it's that really nice, expensive butter lettuce or whatever it is. At the same time, by the way, if any of you are buying romaine lettuce, it comes with those nice 3-packs. And if you look, you realize that the leaves aren't trimmed at the top. The root, it's the entire plant. And nature often doesn't get the memo that, hey, tomorrow we're harvesting, be exactly this size. So there's a lot of food waste that occurs and a lot of food that is going to waste that occurs out in the fields because a carrot's crooked, it's the wrong size, it's too much, etc. I've used the phrase for years. I love cosmetically challenged. I've used the phrase cosmetically blemished for years because it's something I'd heard years ago. And there's a lot of companies that are doing this. I mean, whether it's Ugly Produce in California, it's Inglorious Fruits and Vegetables by, Carrefour in France. The other one that causes a lot of issues is this issue of code dating. And about 7 years ago, when I started this fellowship at Harvard, a little more than 7 years ago, I had reached out to the head of the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic, Emily Broad-Leib, and said, I want to make sure, I got this idea, and I want to make sure it's legal. So would you please have one of your students, one of your lawyers, take a look at codes in Massachusetts, New York, and Michigan, because I thought that'd be the first 3 spots I'd start, and just make certain, what are the laws around selling product past its sell-by date? Having come from the food industry and spent most of my career there, I recognize that these dates are not expiration dates. Not 1 in 100 Americans understands this, and most of us, in all honesty, feel uneasy or terrified to consume a product past this code date. But these are best by. These are sell-by dates. I mean, you stop and think about that for a second. If a grocer is going to sell you a gallon of milk at 10 o'clock at night on that date, you don't have to go home and drink it before midnight. When I started with Trader Joe's back in the 70s, no grocer in America refrigerated eggs. And now, my God, if eggs weren't refrigerated, we'd all think that, we were going to die. Most product didn't have a code date on it. Now, if you look carefully at your water bottles, they all have a BB, a best by date, because the water, obviously, in 2 years goes bad. So this is something that, again, I think that the NRDC and Harvard, Emily Broad-Leib, got very interested after this. We were talking about this. So Dana Gunders and Emily put out a wonderful document called The Dating Game. several years ago. It has to deal with the amount of food that we are throwing out simply because of code dates. This issue came up to me when I started studying this. Now, I'll confess what I did wasn't primarily directed around dealing with the issue of wasted food. I was far more concerned about the fact that we had 1 in 6 at that time. I think it's now 1 in 8. Administrative changes might bring it back to 1 in 6. We had way too many people in America that were struggling to eat properly, that were, as Feeding America says, struggling with hunger. And one of my big learnings was that hunger in America, for the vast majority of these 40+ million people, wasn't a shortage of calories, it was a shortage of nutrients. It was they were buying food, or they were getting food, they just weren't able to get enough of the nutrients. So, in conversations with Catherine D'Amato, who is the 25-year head of the Greater Boston Food Bank, and with Vicki Esquerra, who ran Feeding America for a number of years, in 2010, 11, I had a couple hour-long conversations with her. One of the things that really hit me was, particularly with Vicki Esquerra, was the conversation around the challenge that's faced in getting people that are in need sometimes to utilize the systems of SNAP or even soup kitchens or food pantries because they're embarrassed, they're ashamed. And particularly when you're dealing with a class that's a working poor, the people that are struggling economically, but they're buying food, their inclination to go and get a handout is lessened. The problem is they can't afford to buy the fruits and vegetables and the clean dairy and protein they should be eating, so they're buying heavily sugared, salted, processed foods. I wanted to deal with this because I actually think that the issue of dignity is so profound that most people are hungrier to keep their dignity than their health. And there's data on this, and there's also, just anecdotally from our studies, we know that it really matters that people have a sense of agency, that virtually no one feels great about a system that doesn't allow them to feel that they are taking care of themselves and their family. So what we did is we started a thing called Daily Table. It's a store. It's in Dorchester. It's a nonprofit food market. And it carries fruits, vegetables, dairy, anything that we can recover, plus food we buy, sometimes at special discounts, et cetera. We have about 12,000 members. IRS requires us to be a membership store to make sure that we can track and make sure we're really serving people that IRS would call of charitable need. By placing the store in the right spot in town, which is in a very tough area in Dorchester, by definition, the 5 zip codes that primarily feed Daily Table are all what are called Section 330 eligible in HHS. That's a technical, wonky way of saying that these are economically depressed areas, and that if you're a health care provider, you get additional federal funding to serve this population. We also put together a world-class group of nutritionists from the MedEd group in Boston, from Children's Hospital, Boston Medical Center, Harvard School of Public Health, et cetera, to tell us how much sugar, how much sodium, what fiber and calories should be in a product in order to help move someone forward nutritionally. And since we've opened, which was about 2 years ago, we have made sure that every one of our products meets or exceeds those guidelines. We get product from Produce Market. We get product from Boston area gleaners. Food for Free, which goes around and collects at farmers markets what's left over at the end of the day. We go out to South Shore Organics. We deal directly with a number of farms. We are, thank God for Amazon and Amazon Fresh. They, frankly, at this point are between Greater Boston Food Bank, Food for Free, and Daily Table. There are probably 40 or 50 pallets of amazing, beautiful, fresh stuff every week that's picked up there. We also put in a kitchen. We put in a kitchen because, one, our customers told us we don't have time to cook. If you really want to help us, you're going to have a grab-and-go, healthy, ready meal that we can, when we get off the bus at 6:30 at night, we can take in because we're tired. Our kids have been out of school and they're hungry. And if I don't, as one lady said, if I don't walk through that front door at 6:30 with dinner in my hand, there's trouble. So we put in a kitchen to do that. What it also allows us to do is take in this cosmetically blemished food, take in product that even the Greater Boston Food Bank doesn't want, the gleaners can't give to them because it's damaged or it's really seconds and thirds. But by utilizing it in a kitchen, much in ways we just heard, not quite to the radical degree of insects yet, we hope. Health department probably wouldn't like that. We are able to repurpose this food in a manner where we can take and create delicious meals that are less expensive than the junk food in the area. Now, one story about this is, so last summer happened to be a year when tomatoes in the Northeast, there was an absolute glut, and to the point where it wasn't worth picking them, where farms in Massachusetts were saying, it's just not worth. The price of tomatoes sank so low for several weeks, it wasn't worth going out and picking. The gleaners said, listen, what if we went out, we picked this product for you? It allows you then to have a second harvest come in later in. We'll pick this product. They then sent some to Greater Boston Food Bank, et cetera, but there was so much of it, they called us up and said, can you take, at that time it was like 40 to 50,000 pounds of tomatoes. You can imagine our one little store. If we'd given away tomatoes, we couldn't have gotten rid of that much. Fortunately, we worked with another company and said, yeah, we'll take them. They worked with us to then make a marinara sauce, which we put in these plastic pouches, 5-pound or 5-gallon bags. And we've been using that all winter long for our spaghetti sauce and soup bases, et cetera. But what it did was a win for food not going to waste. It was a win for the farmers, which got this product, instead of just being a loss, have it be able to then get it off the plant, get the plant going back to, so that by September they could have a final crop on it. And of course, it was a win for us and our customers. We also believe in teaching. So what's critical for us is we just opened a teaching kitchen. This is free of charge. We have 3 to 4 classes a week. This is the one with kids after school. And this is something where it's really critical to us to teach them about food, nutrition, food recovery, how to prepare and cook meals that are inexpensive. So Daily Table, this says 11,000. We're actually now over 12,000 members. We've collected over 1 million pounds of food that would be recovered, that would have gone to waste, would have been in landfills. We track this every week. Our sales are up over 170%. We are a nonprofit. Our hope is to get to break even. We're not really interested in becoming profitable. There's no shareholders that have a claim on our profits. We employ 38 people full-time. They're from the community. The community really appreciates that. And what's one of the most important things to us is that our basket size, since we've opened, has gone up over 100%. And this is a community that doesn't waste their money on food. And over time, we've become a larger part of their diet. So we're able to track sort of the impact that we're having on them by watching basket size, more fruits and vegetables, more clean product being produced going into their diet. Finally, this is a picture I got from a customer when I was with Trader Joe's. And it reminded me, I used to put it up on my desk every day when I was president. It reminded me, why are we in business? What are we really doing here? We're not just filling bags with beans and corn and rice, et cetera. And the same thing, really, what's it matter if you recover food or not? And the answer isn't just so much for the food, it's for the next generations. It's for that 7th-generation idea that we want to make sure that, certainly as a grocer, as Daily Table, that we're looking out after food as a way to care for, nourish, and pass on to that next generation a healthy planet. Thank you.
Our next panelist is Kate Mackenzie from City Harvest. She is the Senior Director of Programs. Kate?
I actually think this works out well, the sequence of the panelists. I'm Kate Mackenzie with City Harvest, and if you're not familiar with City Harvest, very briefly, we are the world's first and New York's only food rescue organization. This year we'll rescue 55 million pounds of food from all segments of the food industry and deliver it to soup kitchens and food pantries across New York that serve about 1.4 million people that struggle to put food on their tables and turn to kitchens and pantries. That's fewer than the nearly 3 million New Yorkers who just wonder, how am I going to feed my family tonight? Not saying that they don't, but they have to wonder about, can I afford this? Do I need to skip my meal so that my kids can eat, or something along those lines? A few months ago, I think it was October, I was at a meeting at the Rockefeller Foundation with Doug and a number of, I think Thomas was there, McQuillan, and the organization called IDEO. If you're not familiar with IDEO, IDEO is a human-centered design firm that was helping Rockefeller to think through their strategies and their domestic food waste platform, for lack of a better term. And one of the things, hearkening to the Refed report, right, we know that so much food is wasted in this country, and that most of it, which was actually kind of a shock to me, most of it happens at the consumer level. So for me, I put together the pieces that Doug spoke about of, the majority of Americans, right, are not living in New York or California. They're the average people in the middle of the country that are struggling with income. And how did we know what was really happening in their homes, right? They may be the people that, don't necessarily, compost or aren't intentionally wasting food, but we really didn't know. So we had this kernel of an idea, and so with support from the Rockefeller Foundation and IDEO, we looked at, in January, we set out to understand the behaviors, needs, and desires of people who use food pantries in New York City. We wanted to know who uses these food pantries and why, and then how might City Harvest better serve its current users and improve its reach. Specifically, we wanted to understand the full cycle of food once it reaches people's homes. What are the perceptions and the roles of food waste across all the ways that people shop, cook, and eat? And how might we at City Harvest ensure that all the food that's rescued gets consumed? Were we distributing the right kinds of food at the right times of the day or of the right times of the week? These are just a few of the pictures of the people that we looked at. And this is just a snapshot into some research that definitely needs more exploration. And we really wanted to consider some opportunities to deepen and extend our relevance and build these two concepts of security and efficiencies around food. So the first kind of insight that we looked at and we found was around familiarity. So, it's really interesting to think about New Yorkers overall. We're incredibly diverse, many, many, many different kinds of ethnicities. And a lot of people, I'm thinking about a woman named Gloria who comes from Ecuador, and Gloria didn't necessarily need recipes, right? There's a lot of people, a lot of organizations that just say, here's a ton of recipes, go cook what you will. Gloria was, I think she was in her early 70s. She knew, and my grandmother was the same way. She didn't need a recipe. She just needed whatever was in her kitchen to put together that great feeling. We talked about this, the feeling of a meal around family. She knew what was in that, and she knew what was familiar to her. She wasn't going to try other kinds of foods, and she knew what she needed, and she knew how to cook that. So how might we align our pantry inventory with what's familiar to users? Again, to make sure that there's perhaps not food wasted in their homes. How might we engage the whole family around this experience? And building community around the pantry. Transparency is another big insight for us. How might we cultivate an environment of trust and transparency? I can't think of a better way than Daily Table, frankly. It's quite clear what that model is doing and why people are using that store. It's very transparent. We think about kitchens and pantries are different. There's no two that are similar. For some, might use a tablet system, an iPad system of checking people in and knowing when do you go. And for other people, what's in that experience in the line is very calming to them. For others, it's not. What if pantries operated more like supermarkets or behaved more like a co-op? How might that cultivate an environment of trust and transparency for the users? What if there was a monthly schedule of volunteer shifts, a working knowledge of pantry operations, increased visibility of the food, and really clarity around where the food is coming from? Convenience. How might we make pantry visits as convenient and time efficient as possible? Someone at a recent meeting at the Rockefeller Foundation was noting the latent energy that is in the lines around the blocks of kitchens and pantries. How could people be better utilizing that time, and how can we help enable that? How might we help people get food from the pantry shelves to their kitchen table as quickly as possible? On eating healthy, this is what's, it's really interesting. And we have found, we firmly believe in nutrition education. We firmly believe in teaching people to cook. But a lot of people really know what's a good food and what's not so good for them. So how might we invite a dialogue around what makes a meal good? What's a good meal to people? And talk about that perhaps more so than what makes a meal healthy. I think there'll be a lot of similarities in that conversation. And how might we help people develop and stick with healthy habits? Finally, on wasting food, how might we help people experience the time and cost savings of eating all the food that they have? How might we make it easier for people to plan meals and repurpose ingredients? And how might we get people excited about the creative potential for food? So those are just a few of the things that we're thinking about, and to be and allowing ourselves the space of the unknown. We don't have the answers to all of these questions right now, but as we're exploring this intersection between food security and food waste, pondering that so that we can ultimately ensure that more people are fed great food. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. I have 1,000 questions for all of our panelists, but I will be asking a few questions, and then we will open it up to the audience so that if you have questions, you will be able to ask them as well. So my first question is actually to take off on what Doug said. I don't personally want to eat food waste. It doesn't sound appetizing, and so I loved your wasted food alternative. So do any of the rest of you have better ways of expressing what we're doing?
We've talked about this a lot, so I don't have a lot to add on that, but I was in part of these conversations, we're thinking about, not calling it food waste, we know that, but it's also, it's just food. It's just food. You know, we think about, in the last week, I got my food from many different sources. I am a participant in Blue Apron. I go to my local grocery stores. I have our farmer's market, all these different kinds of ways to get food. For many, many, many Americans, in particular New Yorkers, going to your kitchen or pantry is just another way to get food. So I think just, what do we have, we don't have to brand or call something that it's just food. It's another way of using food that's in the system.
I think, sorry.
No, please go ahead. No.
After you.
I was just going to say, one of the things I didn't get a chance to mention is that in our focus groups with people before we opened, they let us know, don't talk about health. Don't call this nutritious. It'll just turn us off. Like, what did you take out of it to make it taste, to make it healthy? So I actually want to, when Kate was talking about this, it reminded me, we talk about delicious, we talk about fresh, we talk about affordable and convenient, and we talk about it as food. We actually, the stuff we're talking here is academic wonk talk in a way, because we don't ever customer face with wasted food and food waste and, and all this stuff. I think that your point about it's food, and, we got great food, is a really critical way. And I also love the idea about the real concept and what we do in the teaching is how do you just make food taste good? And you talk about all the ways to utilize food, because food is a precious resource. If you talk about it that way and how much water and land is being used, people really get it, because it's just about food. And food is a precious resource. Let's not waste this precious resource. You wouldn't want to waste your money. They understand economics is so precious. Well, food's part of that economic cycle. It's so precious.
Chef?
As you just mentioned, that I think sometimes not making a big deal about it is a very good thing. And like even at our restaurant, like we do not say that we are veg-centric, where almost 60% of it on each plate, it has more vegetables than animal protein, because on an average, Americans are eating 110 grams of protein a day from animals, versus we should be eating about 50 to 60 maximum. So we don't go around saying that, nor do we write it on our menu saying that this soup has been made from scraps and stuff like that. I think if you don't have to say it, but you just do it, because in the end, what are you proving? You're proving to your own self that we stopped waste. By you consuming it, great for us. But even if you didn't know it, great, because you will anyway make a big deal about it when you come in and tell me all your allergies. So we know that. So we don't have to tell you more about what we are doing. So we come to know what allergy you have. Believe me, all right? We get that every day. So if that you don't fall under that problem, we'll just give you what we need to give you. So I think that is a good way of looking at it.
And I'd say it's also becoming it's also becoming increasingly easy to take these approaches because more and more people are learning about food waste. I actually noticed today that we didn't start with a what is food waste piece, and hopefully no one missed that, but something that we've been encountering and that we're really thrilled about is that we don't have to start every discussion with a pitch selling people food waste and trying to get them interested in what wasted food is, that we can start talking about the solutions like we did today, and that's what's really exciting for us.
One of the interesting things about this conversation that we're having now is food's been wasted for decades, and it's nothing new, but now it is on a hot plate. So the question is, why now? And is it just a nice topic that's going to be gone in the next 10 years, or is it going to continue?
I'll jump in, and then others more informed can follow. I think, one, we talk a lot about how we're going to feed the 9 billion in 2050, and a lot of talk about all the new land and technologies and stuff. If you just start with the fact, how do we better utilize the 30 to 40% of what we're not consuming, you would end up being able to feed the vast majority of that population growth with no additional resources being allocated. So I think it's important from that standpoint. I also think that we're probably the first generation, I know I'm in my 60s, I'm the first generation probably to ever walk on the planet Earth, that society at large didn't worry, do we have enough food to feed ourselves? So my parents grew up in the Depression, and with the Dust Bowl and famine and locusts, all that, they worried about it. And there was waste not, want not, and there was, food was a precious thing. I think it's coming back around because food for my generation, and frankly much of our society, isn't precious. We don't think about it as something critical. And now we're starting to see its impact on the environment. We're also starting to see the social justice issues. These are sensitivities that are rising that wouldn't come out of just the natural preciousness of the food itself because we have so much of it.
I would add to that, when City Harvest started 35 years ago, we rescued the majority of our food from restaurants, right? And a lot of people, we have a close connection, close relationship with restaurants, and actually about 15% of our food now comes from restaurants because you're not doing a great job if you've got a lot of food left over at the end of your night. So part of that, I think, boils down to economics, right? And the Refed report was so brilliant in many ways, but it looked at what was done, used the same model over a decade ago with Mackenzie cost curves, right? And so that was done around the environmental movement of how can we, what levers can we push, what levers can we pull to ultimately reduce our carbon emissions, which is of course related to food waste. But if you look at from a business case, how can businesses save money? Food waste, reduction of food waste is a major, major component of that. So I think it's getting a lot of play initially in the industry because of money, but also because, I don't know about the last few months. However, still I think there's a lot of emphasis and push on climate change and the connections of particularly methane production as it relates to carbon is a big deal, and how we need to be reducing the amount of organic waste that goes ultimately to landfills. I think that was the perfect marriage of the anti-hunger world, the environmental world coming together to be a big push to increase visibility of this issue.
Sorry. And to ground some of these economic benefits that Kate's mentioning in numbers, the food businesses, so retailers, restaurants, manufacturers, are missing out on a 1.9 billion profit opportunity by not addressing wasted food in their operations. And it's like date labeling that Doug mentioned earlier, that's a $29 billion economic loss on the consumer level because we're throwing out so much food just because we can't decipher and translate what Best Buy, Use By, Sell By means. And so there's a huge opportunity there, like Kate was mentioning, and businesses are starting to pick up on this. And then there's also a lot of traction on an individual level. Individual people are stepping up in their companies, as consumers, in their communities, and saying, this isn't right. We shouldn't have 40%, 30% of our food going to waste when we do have so many people hungry. And there are really logical and innovative ways to feed them, whether it's through nonprofits like City Harvest or through some of the innovators that I mentioned and creating new products or secondary sellers like Daily Table with Doug. So thank you for referencing us there.
Yeah.
Just one other thing, even in regards to University of Massachusetts just removed trays from the dining room. And we saved 30% of food because you just pile on when you have a tray. They started having plates which are much smaller, like a B&B plate for kids. No one's stopping you to come 10 times, but you will not go 10 times, most likely, all right? So there is food for us to give you, but you will not go. It's just that if you have a tray, you're just going to keep piling and keep piling on. So just by doing that, if you really, really do want to have trays, have a red color tray. It has been proven by Charles Spence that red is an aspect of danger. Even in hospitals, if you give red color trays, the patients eat less. And so give red color trays if you had to do so. Don't give green, don't give blue, don't give the nice looking colors and make it look so pretty. That will create problems. The other thing is even at our counter, one thing that we stopped is straws, because I just don't understand. At home, you don't normally use a straw to drink water or Coke or whatever you all drink at home. But so I said, let's stop straws. We got no complaints from the students. We got complaints from faculty. The story about landfills really spoke to the students. Just talking about that, our sales went up 120% because of that on our counter, because of the landfill issue. That spoke with these students somehow. It resonates to them at this age. In terms of last thing about, I think if we can just connect the dots, like yesterday I came to know, I mean, we pick up a lot of stuff from farmers markets, some of the farmers who just say, they just give it away to us, and they say, yeah, we're not going to use this here, take it, because they give it to the chickens and around their areas and stuff like that. But we do have two farmers that we work quite often at the farmers market. But one thing, Amanda does this, this broccoli hot dog. I don't know if you've been to a restaurant, but she does that. But she has so much broccoli heads left, like the good part of the broccoli left, that she doesn't know what to do with it. So actually we've come to a conclusion that we are going to pick that up now from her. So I think if we could just get connections like that from chefs who can say, oh, I don't use this, you use this, you don't use that, I do that, I think we can make a lot of movement there. And talking about the lettuce that you had, I think you had shown, all that lettuce that goes with the chef's garden. We get our vegetables from the chef's garden in Ohio, and that happens all the time. Oh, Thomas Keller only wanted a 2-inch carrot. Now they've become 3. Do you want it? Or the lettuce from baby became larger. Do you want it? And we take stuff up like that from them. And I think it's just, I think if there were systems of connecting people with the right people, I think we could make a huge difference.
One of the things that Katy mentioned was all the new startups that are going on. And I've been collecting material on food waste for the last couple of years, and the shock is the number of new programs that have been launched recently. What's the chance that this is just a bubble and that they're not going to survive?
That's a great question, because a lot of startups do fail. And for these innovators, their biggest challenge is actually access to financing, and whether that's grant money or actual investments at seed and venture capital stages. I can't say yes or no on any of them confidently, but there is a huge opportunity, and I think what we can probably all agree on is that food waste isn't going to go away. We will always have wasted food. Even if we prevent and recover as much as we can, we're still going to have some bit of organic material that needs to be recycled or needs to be upcycled into something else. And I mean, right now we have this mountainous resource to work with, and a lot of the innovators that I've spoken with, they've actually said, you know what, if in a decade we're out of business because we don't have any wasted food to deal with, I'd be happy. Like that is some of them, that's their exit strategy that they have in mind, is food waste goes away and we go away. And for them, they've done their job well. So a long answer to a hard question, but I think a lot of them do have the potential to succeed. We see other corporations buying up smaller, innovative ideas, technologies, and algorithms. Coca-Cola, Yum Brands, they're looking at these types of solutions. There are a lot of accelerators. We have a bunch here in New York, Food Future. There are a bunch out on the West Coast too, that are working specifically on food sustainability and food efficiency, which ultimately comes down to addressing wasted food. And they're getting support through these venues, a lot of universities, University of Massachusetts, Harvard, MIT. they're incubating these ideas and really supporting these innovators with the resources and the knowledge and the connections that they need, because the connections are a big piece of it.
I'll just say, from City Harvest perspective, we love it because we know what we're good at, and we know we're also, it doesn't make sense for us to bring our big truck down some of these, let's use 13th Street as an example, like, and if some of the startups that can really function in that sort of smaller space, I think our minimum right now is 50 pounds. And if we can rather say, actually, it doesn't make sense for us to come, but here's some people that are right around your area that can pick up that food, that's especially powerful. The other thing I will say, there's a lot of startups, but it's hard to see with these lights. I don't think that there's anybody right here now from the city mayor's office or city council, but the municipal governments that are getting behind food waste really need to be called out, because it is bold and it is really progressive, and that's, I think, how we're going to see a lot of reduction in food waste. Of course, in New York, we see the curbside composting pickups, but there's a lot more that's not as sexy as that, that's happening, that's really going to make this impact, particularly for the size of New York. So I really want to appreciate that this is not just a private response, but there's public efforts here happening as well.
So I would add just to that, which I think are all really great comments, that as usual, I believe the forces of the marketplace often dictate a lot, and I think that what we're finding is that food is becoming precious once again. It is becoming important. It's economic, as has been mentioned, and there's gaps in the economics. So, there's always going to be cosmetically blemished, challenged fruits and vegetables. Things aren't going to grow in nature perfectly. And unless we as consumers dramatically change, that when we walk into a Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, et cetera, and buy cosmetically blemished, then there's always going to be another market for that. I used to joke and say, instead of Daily Table, I'm going to call it Heirloom Foods, because then I can get all the funky looking stuff. And as soon as we call something an heirloom tomato, it can look, as a matter of fact, if it looks like a regular tomato, no one wants it. It's like, that's not an heirloom. It doesn't look horrible. Or heirloom apples or heirloom carrots. It's like, wow, if we could just call all of this food heirloom. Or the other side of it, of course, is I walked here from the hotel, live in Boston, obviously, and so I came down on the train yesterday. So I walked here from the hotel, went through Union Square and saw the farmer's market. And there was one more time when it dawned on me, if you just saw nothing but beautiful apples or perfect carrots in a farmer's market, I think all of us would go, wait a minute, where'd you get these? Like, they don't grow in nature that way. We instinctively know that. I think there's a marketplace that will always be there for the gaps that are there. In the same way that Daily Table, for instance, works hand in hand with Greater Boston Food Bank, because it turns out not only do we expand the spectrum of who can be reached, but as we know, there's a real struggle to provide 30 days worth of food from any soup, kitchen, pantry, et cetera, or food bank. And we can be that safety net in between to help them get affordable stuff. So I think that even if you think about it, and what I would say, final thought on that is, I believe that the more organizations stop trying to silo and look at it as competition and start looking at how they network together, and together they actually build networks and marketplaces that become viable, I think the stronger we become.
And then one more way to think about this, instead of thinking of these innovators as addressing the issue of food waste, is that they're making our food system more efficient. So they do have a purpose beyond just working on this, and whether that's serving as a stock market for your restaurants and pricing food based on demand and availability and ingredient freshness, which is actually a New York-based startup here. Those things can still stay around even if we miraculously do address the issue in whole.
I have a final question, and we have 2 microphones on either side, and if you have questions, if you could start coming up now, and we'll be able to ask a few questions. Doug, I have the tough question for you. When will Daily Table open up in Brooklyn?
In Brooklyn? Well, I got 2 daughters that live in Brooklyn, and
that's a start. Wait a minute.
Lived there a long time. So Daily Table is still in proof of concept, because our concept is around trying to become economically viable. And by economically viable, I mean basically close to break even, if not. Because one of the challenges that every hunger relief, food recovery agency that's a nonprofit faces is they're so philanthropic or government support dependent, that they're not really scalable. City Harvest does a phenomenal job, and you heard the tonnage that they're doing every year. And I have great admiration for them. I have great admiration for Greater Boston Food Bank, et cetera. Daily Table's not trying to compete and doesn't want to step into that space. Instead, we're trying to look at the gaps between and where the spectrum's not filled. The Bronx is really, actually, I've been meeting with Alicia Glenn, who's the deputy mayor and head of food policy, her head of food policy here, and several other people about actually the Bronx. And we have a site there that we're talking about whether Daily Table's ready to come down. It's about funding. It's about product supply chain. It's about a number of things. But we certainly hope by next year to be down here.
And Brooklyn's after the Bronx, is that right?
Well, you know, the question with Brooklyn is the same way. I often get questions when people say, hey, how come you went into, like, you know, Dorchester or Roxbury? Our second store we've already got leased. It will be in Roxbury, which again is a tough economic area. Like, how come you don't do this in Newton? If this is such a great idea, how come you do it out where you live? And I answer, there is nothing we do that we wouldn't be happy and delighted to do in Newton. The reality is that the 1 in 8 Americans that are food insecure don't live to any proportion in Newton. They live to a large proportion in Dorchester. The challenge is Brooklyn, I don't want to spend $1 million to open up a store and find out that, with no offense to anyone present, that hipsters and yuppies are shopping there that actually could shop at Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. Okay. Because that's not really our marketplace. We really want to go where people need us the most and where it isn't going to gentrify.
Okay. We have our first question over here.
Hi, how are you? My name is Gerardo Soto. I represent Food Waste Experts. We help companies, universities, colleges to treat food waste on site using cutting-edge technology, either aerobic digestion, composting in 2 weeks, biomass. And one of the things that has been hard since we started the company 7 years ago is change. That's one of the things that's very difficult for human beings to do that. So when we started, we thought we were going to be able to change the way we adults behave. And I think it was after 6 months we realized that I was not there where we needed to speak to. So we started talking to the schools, K-12 schools, and trying to put our systems, composting systems in the schools so they could see how they are able to transform waste, in this case, well, food waste, into composting, grow things on site, close the loop, go to the dining hall, and they can really see that. One of the things that happened to us is that we could have a huge ripple effect when we go with the students, as opposed when we go to the adults, because they knock their parents and they start asking them, how come we don't compost on our house? How come we don't recycle? So I just want to hear your experience, I mean, about adults to children.
Next question. No.
You made a very good point at the end there that children can be an influencer to their parents. And I haven't worked hands-on with children, but I've written guidebooks for children on how they can reduce food waste in schools. And one of the important pieces always was, you know, encourage your parents to do this. You know, take them home and teach them something, and use the children kind of as a launching pad to get the parents involved. And in addition to that, I mean, those children are going to grow up really fast, and our food supply may or may not be even more precious at that point. And they're going to need to have these skills and be equipped with that. So I think it's very valuable that you're going through the lens of children. And because a lot of adults and even people in my generation, you know, we don't want to change. We have a hard time with behavior change. It takes a long time, and especially with something like food that we have such a connection to, that in our mind, like, this is, you know, my culture and my food culture, and it is hard to change. So I sympathize with you, and I commend you for going through that way.
Next question.
This actually slightly piggybacks on that, but I teach sustainability and culinary arts at a school in Connecticut, and we're trying to initiate a zero waste program within the school district, and we're coming up against some blocks with the federal school lunch program and the large companies such as Chartwell, Sodexo that are subcontracted, and them pushing back on us saying, no, we're not going to help pay for this. You guys have to figure out a way to pay for this. And I'm just wondering if any of these startups or any of you guys have had success dealing with some of the larger corporations and how we would go about that.
I wanted to, because you can definitely answer on the tactical side. I want to just say that I think there's some upstream work that needs to be done here too, because I've worked for almost 15 years with the New York City school system, and who's, again, made significant advancements, but it's about marrying up the USDA federal school lunch program with their initiatives around food waste, because they're both very viable, active programs that are really just starting to talk to each other. So particularly from either food donation or what do you do with the food waste, it's not expressly clear. So I think the more, and I know Connecticut has a really strong, Rosa DeLauro, really strong proponent in Congress around that. So that's one area that I would encourage you to work on too, but specific to Chartwell's and others.
And so working with those food service providers is very difficult. And in my experience working with some of their competitors and actually getting them to implement successful programs, it took a lot of kind of crafting different narratives, because depending on who you're talking to at Sodexo or at the school board, they might care about the environmental trade-offs, but my bet is that they're more concerned about the business savings and the cost savings there. And so, I mean, my recommendation is that, if you haven't done this already, and I'd be happy to talk to you about this more afterwards, really dig into and figure out if you can identify what their cost savings are from, just a straight cash flow standpoint, emphasizing the fact that there are labor savings and your employees might be more excited about things. There are benefits that you can offer them. There are just like some general workplace vibe benefits there. And then they could increase customer service, they could increase sales. There are a lot of opportunities for them to benefit financially from implementing these programs and taking them up. And then, and Refed is actually in the process of working with food service providers and to encourage them to be more collaborative on a pre-competitive basis, kind of like we've been talking about, and to share best practices and to not be so hard-headed about such things like that. So, good luck.
Can I jump in and just say, I think to a large degree, again, not to represent the marketplace here, but I do think that with the environmental movement, it didn't usually come top down. It came out of kids out of schools. Like it was, they come home and say, how come we're throwing this stuff out? Why aren't we recycling? Sort of, and I think that sort of pressure. So I think getting bottom-up pressure is oftentimes what it takes, because most of these organizations are under a lot of economic competitive pressure, right? And only when there's transparency, which now, you've got the internet, whether it's with Glassdoor and all these other things, they can start to add a level of transparency. I think there's an opportunity here to start to give some transparency that would have a bottom-up sense of pressure that also lets people know that I'll get rewarded if I can step up here and do something. I might actually win contracts, whereas my competition that is ignoring this subject won't. Right. I think that, and I'm unburdened by facts, but that's my inclination on that.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Allie Forsman from Recultivate New York, and my company and my nonprofit are both focused on the back half of the food cycle. And I hear, Kate, you mentioned the food cycle in general, and Chef, you said, composting should be last. But ultimately, we're dealing with a finite amount of nutrients on the planet, and we're also dealing with only man-made soil at this point. And I focused on New York to deal with the nearly 36,000 farms and brownfields, so we create green space as well as more nutritious soil, because I'm sure we've all had that strawberry that just tastes like nothing. And so dealing with that and really thinking about throughout the different stages of your experiences and looking at that and saying, well, how can we participate at every level? The EPA triangle really doesn't address the fact that land is really a part of every step. So what can we all do? And how do we sit down at the table with those existing systems? I mean, the waste haulers, the food distributors, they really need to think about where and how we can all come to the table and shift those systems, especially in terms of cost.
Comments?
So I'll just jump in and say that, well, for instance, I think that what you hit on is really important, which is in any of these issues, you're dealing with a systemic problem. There's no single bullet, no silver bullet on this. It doesn't matter if you're City Harvest, you're Daily Table, Refed, whatever. No one's going to have the answer, because it turns out that it is a system challenge. I think having said that, I love the phrase I learned, I think it was at the New York Times Food for the Future conference, something that soil is a digestive system of the earth. It is. And I think that, so at Daily Table, since the day we've started, we've been very emphatic and almost, with religious fervor over making sure that we compost all of our material, the ends of zucchinis we can't use or whatever it is that ends up not being utilized. And we do that with a minority-owned company in Boston that then, tells us and tracks what they did with that. I think that the ways in which we support each other in a system will be really important here, because I don't think it is about anaerobic digesters versus food recovery, versus, I think it's about ways we get all of it to work.
Another question? Another question? Yeah.
Hi, I'm just curious, this question's sort of about whether people inherently know what's good for them, which I think, Kate, you kind of touched on. So as we know, kind of America has a huge problem with obesity, diabetes, kind of this readily available access to fast food, junk food. I'm wondering, do you think that when people in food deserts are offered the choice between fast food or whole food, will they always choose the whole food? And why or why not?
No.
Next question.
Let me be clear. I think I have almost 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. He doesn't know what's good for him. I think food education, specifically around types of foods, is really, really important from young ages. When you talk about, I think, and everyone here has probably heard this, right? And I really want to be clear. Just because people are poor doesn't mean they're stupid, right? And people also need to appreciate better skills. Like, it's one thing to then make the choice to buy the broccoli or but then if they don't know what to do with it or keep it fresh at home, that's different to me. That's a skills education than it is about what's right, what's good or what's not good. So I think that there's a lot there, and I think that it has to do also with, I know what's good for me. Do I choose it all the time? No. So there has to be some room for personal choice and treats as well.
So let me jump in on it, because this is a really important question. One of the biggest concerns that funders often had before Daily Table opened was, can you really change behavior? I mean, sure, you're going to go out and offer this food, and it's going to be economically agnostic to junk food, but will people change because of that? And I think, one, we've seen that some will, not everybody, but many will, and it's because they've been hammered by their doctors and by society and everything to know that they've got to eat more fruits and vegetables. When their kid gets diagnosed as pre-diabetic, it gets people's attention, and a mother's attention. I want to change. I don't want my child to become diabetic at 15 or 14 or 12. So I think that there's a lot that can be done. I would say that we also have to be very careful that we're not a little bit, quite honestly, a room full of elite that get to choose what we eat. And therefore, if I'm a little overweight or if I'm obese, that's a personal choice. Among those 43 to 49 million food insecure, obesity is an outcome, not a choice. Because your only other option was to starve. Because you either get to have calorically cheap foods or you can't afford the nutrients. And the documentary, A Place at the Table, that Participant Media put together or funded, did a great job of showing that you only get to, on SNAP, you only get to buy 340 calories worth of vegetables for a SNAP allocation, but you can get 3,700 calories of basically soda, chips, and crackers, so that if you're really strapped economically, you're going to do what it takes to get you enough calories to keep you alive. But a result of that is you're going to become obese or type 2 diabetes, et cetera. So we as a society need to step up and go, these aren't people making bad choices in their diet. What's wrong with these people? These are outcomes that are economically rational, it turns out, and we as society have let them down.
Thank you.
Given, unfortunately, the word that the panel has to end. This has been incredible, and I really, really thank all of the panelists. I think they were wonderful.